a luxurious Manhattan auditorium, before the world's business elite, millionaire Victor Harrington presented his great technological revolution. But suddenly, the giant screens went black. Charts disappeared, investors began to murmur, and the man who thought he was invincible panicked in front of everyone. Engineers ran around in desperation, but nothing worked. And then, from the back of the room, an unexpected voice rose. "I can fix it." The silence was broken by laughter. The only one who dared to say that was Lucas Carter, a 14-year-old boy, the cleaning lady's son. Nobody believed it. But when their hands touched the system, the impossible happened before the incredulous eyes of the elite. And the night that began in debauchery ended in pure admiration. In the heart of Manhattan, the mirrored tower of Harrington Global Systems rose, a building that seemed to touch the sky and reflect the arrogant radiance of its owner. Victor Harrington, at 52, was more than a millionaire. He was a symbol of corporate power. Owner of one of the largest technology companies in the country, he had built his fortune on million-dollar contracts and strategic partnerships that made him respected and feared among investors. Victor believed nothing was beyond his control. He wore impeccably tailored suits, drove armored cars, and lived in mansions that resembled museums. For him, every detail of his life was a calculated reflection of absolute success. His corporate headquarters wasn't just an office building. It was a monument to his ego. White marble corridors led to conference rooms equipped with cutting-edge technology, while employees moved silently, like cogs in a machine that couldn't fail. Victor cultivated a culture of unwavering excellence, where failure was not tolerated. Anyone who dared make a mistake was dismissed without hesitation. To his subordinates, he wasn't just a boss. He was a ruthless force who demanded results at any cost. In the hallways, his name was spoken with respect, but also with fear. The image he had built followed him like a shadow, cold, calculating, and untouchable. That night, his company's main auditorium would host yet another display of power. International investors had already arrived in New York to attend the presentation that promised to change the course of corporate technology. Giant screens were installed, every seat carefully prepared, and even the smallest details, from the lighting to the ambience, were chosen to impress. Victor believed nothing could go wrong, that the show would be as perfect as ever. But fate, with cruel irony, had already positioned its pieces on the board. And soon, before the world's elite, the millionaire who thought he controlled everything would face a collapse he could not foresee. Far from the bright lights of Harrington Global Systems, in a small, peeling-walled Brooklyn apartment, 14-year-old Lucas Carter's routine was shaped by silence and simplicity. The only child of Margaret Carter, a 40-year-old cleaning lady who had worked for Victor Harrington's company for years, he had grown up learning to extract value from the little things. The modest home lacked luxury, but it was full of dignity. Margaret made a point of keeping everything clean and organized, even after long workdays. Her worn blue uniform hung on the bedroom door, a constant reminder of the daily struggles she fought to support them both. Lucas was no ordinary teenager. While other boys his age spent hours playing video games or engaging in fleeting distractions, he harbored a quiet passion for technology. He had inherited a used computer from a former school teacher, which he repaired himself with discarded parts. With patience and tireless curiosity, he disassembled and reassembled broken devices, read tutorials on free websites, and jotted down solutions in a dog-eared notebook, always within reach. For him, technology wasn't just fun, but a fascinating puzzle that needed to be solved. Margaret watched him with pride and awe. She knew her son was talented, but she also worried that the world would never give him the opportunity to showcase his talent. That week, as Margaret prepared for another shift at Harrington Global Headquarters, Lucas insisted on accompanying her. There was no one to drop him off at home, and she, exhausted, reluctantly relented, asking only that he remain silent at the back of the auditorium. The boy, however, saw this as a rare opportunity. His eyes shone with anticipation as he imagined the giant screens, the sophisticated systems, and the modern machines he might have the chance to observe up close. He didn't know it yet, but that night held a defining moment for him. An instant in which his knowledge, so often ignored, would become the key to changing everything, including his mother's fate. Harrington Global Systems' main auditorium was impeccable, as if every detail had been designed to convey power. Modern chandeliers reflected soft light onto the stage, while dozens of giant screens waited to display futuristic graphics and projections. Rows of padded leather chairs were aligned with almost military precision. The ambience exuded sophistication, from the subtle aroma released by automatic diffusers to the discreet sound of classical music that filled the space before the performance began. Staff scurried about, checking cables, adjusting microphones, and testing the lighting, all aware that Victor Harrington tolerated no mistakes. At the back of the room, Lucas Carter watched every movement with watchful eyes. Sitting next to his mother, he held his notebook in his lap, scribbling circuit diagrams and possible solutions to system errors he himself imagined. While Margaret worried about her son's lack of attention, Lucas was fascinated by the scene before him. Every screen, every wire, every connected computer was a living work of art for him. It was as if he could see the hidden machinery behind the spectacle, something invisible to the other guests but completely natural to his curious mind. Backstage, Victor Harrington reviewed the schedule with his assistants. The speech was ready, the charts prepared, the numbers polished to impress investors. He stared at himself in the reflection of a switched-off screen, adjusting his tie, confident that this would be another night of triumph. He never imagined, not for a moment, that the technology on which he had invested his perfect image was about to betray him in front of everyone. And much less did he imagine that the solution would come not from his elite engineers, but from a boy sitting anonymously in the back of the auditorium. The auditorium doors opened elegantly, and a wave of refined voices filled the space. Men and women in impeccable suits and evening gowns walked the red carpet to the stage, accompanied by assistants carrying briefcases, tablets, and cutting-edge cell phones. They were investors from around the world, American, European, Asian, all there to hear Victor Harrington's speech and, perhaps, bet millions on his next technological innovation. The atmosphere grew heavier by the minute, charged with anticipation and the calculated gleam of eyes searching for profit opportunities. Victor emerged from the center of the auditorium like a conductor entering his orchestra. With a firm stride and an expression of utter confidence, he greeted each guest with a smile that blended charm and superiority. He shook hands, exchanged quick words in different languages, and then returned to the stage, where the spotlight awaited him. For him, this was a game that had already begun with victory. He had the stage, he had the audience, and, above all, he was certain he was in control. His voice echoed with rehearsed phrases of welcome, each word carefully chosen to reinforce his image as the undisputed leader. Meanwhile, at the back of the auditorium, Lucas Carter watched in silence, absorbing every detail. The glow of the giant screens, the cables running discreetly across the floor, the equipment blinking at regular intervals. Nothing escaped his curious gaze. Beside him, Margaret watched nervously, hoping her son wouldn't attract unwanted attention. But Lucas wasn't just watching. He was learning, mentally connecting each piece of that technological puzzle. He didn't know it yet, but all that knowledge that had seemed useless until then would be put to the test sooner than he imagined. The auditorium lights gradually dimmed, plunging the audience into a respectful silence. On stage, only the glow of the giant screens illuminated the space, reflecting on Victor Harrington's confident face. He adjusted the microphone clipped to the lapel of his suit and, with an imposing gesture, began the presentation. His firm voice echoed throughout the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you will witness a technological revolution that will change the world of business." Every word carried the weight of the arrogance of someone who believed himself untouchable. Complex graphs and futuristic projections began to appear on the screens. They showed impressive growth figures, million-dollar contracts, and promises of innovations capable of dominating the international market. The fascinated investors leaned forward in their chairs, some taking quick notes, others exchanging knowing glances. For Victor, every expression of admiration was fuel for his ego. He moved around the stage like a seasoned actor, calculating gestures, pauses, and glances, certain he was delivering a flawless performance. At the back of the auditorium, Lucas Carter observed everything with a different level of attention. While the others saw only graphs and projections, he analyzed the connections, digital commands, and the system's operating patterns. Something in his gut told him that the presentation's grandeur depended on a structure more fragile than it seemed. Margaret, beside her son, simply hoped that the evening would end without a hitch, unaware that fate was already plotting its own twist. And when Lucas's eyes returned to the screens, a strange feeling gripped his chest. Something was about to happen. On the illuminated stage, Victor Harrington paced back and forth with a firm stride, displaying the practiced charisma of someone who knew he was the center of attention. His gestures were sweeping, his voice projected confidence, and each sentence seemed carefully crafted to impress. He spoke of past achievements, multimillion-dollar partnerships, and a future of innovation that only his company could offer. To the audience, he was the image of a visionary leader. To himself, it was confirmation that nothing could go wrong. With each slide displayed on the giant screens, Victor watched his guests' reactions and reveled in their whispers of admiration. Some investors exchanged knowing glances, others took discreet photos, and everyone seemed captivated by the spectacle. Victor lifted his chin confidently and let out a faint smile of triumph. In that moment, he felt untouchable, as if he controlled not only the technology but also the very narrative that enveloped every eye in the room. It was more than a presentation. It was a display of his absolute power. Meanwhile, at the back of the auditorium, Lucas Carter sensed the millionaire's almost exaggerated confidence. For the boy, who viewed technology practically and objectively, it was strange to witness such arrogance based on machines that, in his opinion, could fail at any moment. Margaret watched her son clutch his notebook to his chest, his gaze fixed on the screens. She didn't understand, but Lucas already sensed that the perfection he displayed there was just a fragile facade. And soon, everyone in the room would discover just how fragile it truly was. Suddenly, a barely perceptible crack echoed through the auditorium, followed by an irregular flicker on the giant screens. At first, few understood. Victor Harrington, confident in his performance, continued speaking as if nothing had happened. But within seconds, the graphics disappeared, replaced by a black screen that reflected the guests' confusion. An uneasy murmur ran through the audience, and soon all eyes turned to the projections, which remained inert. The background music ceased, and the silence was filled with whispers of concern. Victor froze for a moment, but then raised his hands, trying to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, just a technical glitch, nothing major." His voice, however, sounded less firm, betraying the insecurity that was beginning to creep in. He waved to the technicians backstage, demanding with brusque gestures that they fix the problem immediately. Employees scurried back and forth, fiddling with cables and keyboards, but the darkness persisted on the screens. As time passed, the audience grew more restless. Investors whispered among themselves, some frowning, others already glancing at their watches. At the back of the auditorium, Lucas Carter felt his heart race. His eyes scanned the cables, the panels, and the interrupted command sequence. To him, the failure had a clear, almost obvious pattern, but no one seemed to notice. Margaret, at his side, noticed her son's tension and squeezed his arm, asking for silence with a worried look. But Lucas already understood. This wasn't a simple error, it was a system failure. And as Victor struggled to hold up his safety mask, the boy already knew the night was about to fall apart for the arrogant millionaire. What began as discreet murmurs soon turned into a whirlwind of restless voices. International investors, accustomed to the precision of impeccable corporate events, exchanged worried glances. Some rose from their seats, others frantically typed messages on their phones, as if already reporting the fiasco to colleagues and partners. The trust Victor had cultivated over years seemed to evaporate in a matter of minutes. Every second of blank screen time was a wound to his reputation. Victor Harrington, amid the spotlight, tried to maintain his composure, but sweat was already trickling down his forehead. His once commanding voice now sounded strained. Just a few moments, ladies and gentlemen, just a few moments. But the audience seemed unconvinced. The sound of scraping chairs echoed through the auditorium, and the discomfort was palpable. The company's engineers continued to rush back and forth, but the frustration etched on their faces only heightened the sense of helplessness. The millionaire, accustomed to controlling everything, felt his empire falter before his very eyes. At the back of the room, Lucas Carter observed every detail with a mixture of anxiety and fascination. He understood the pattern of error, recognized the signs that indicated where the flaw lay. It was like seeing a puzzle that others overlooked. Beside him, Margaret looked around apprehensively, as if she could feel the weight of the growing embarrassment. Lucas clutched the worn notebook to his chest, an idea boiling in his mind. The entire auditorium was plunged into chaos, and unbeknownst to me, I was about to hear the most unlikely voice of the night. The buzz grew like an uncontrolled wave, until a firm, youthful voice rang through the auditorium. "I can fix it." The silence was immediate, as if someone had turned off all the sounds at once. Eyes turned to the back of the room, where Lucas Carter, 14, stood shyly beside his mother. The contrast was stark. A thin teenager, dressed simply and with a worn notebook in his hands, in front of an audience full of expensive suits and luxurious dresses. Margaret felt her heart race. Her maternal instinct screamed to pull her son back into his seat. But there was a determination in Lucas's eyes that she had never seen before. It wasn't bravado, it wasn't impulse. It was certainty. The silence turned into giggles, which soon exploded into laughter. The idea that an unknown kid could solve what highly paid engineers couldn't sounded too absurd to these businessmen and women. Victor Harrington was the first to laugh out loud, his voice thick with sarcasm. "You? The cleaning lady's son thinks he can save the night." He raised his hands, encouraging the guests to join in his mockery. Soon the entire auditorium was laughing with him, as if Lucas were just a comical distraction in the midst of the disaster. Margaret blushed with embarrassment, her eyes welling up, but Lucas didn't back down. He gripped the notebook more firmly and took a step forward, his gaze fixed on the blank screens. The laughter echoed through the space, but to him it was just distant noise. His heart was beating fast, but his mind was working clearly. He knew he could solve it. I just needed a chance. Victor, still laughing, shook his head in disbelief. Well, boy, show us your magic, he said mockingly. Some guests applauded ironically. Others recorded the scene on their cell phones, certain that they would witness a new humiliation. But turning back was no longer an option. Lucas was standing up in front of everyone, ready to face not only a blocked system, but also the prejudice and mockery of the elite. At that moment, he was no longer just the cleaning lady's son. It was someone about to change the course of that night. Victor Harrington's words echoed through the hall like an invitation to mockery. Well, boy, show us your magic, he repeated, laughing to himself. The guests burst into laughter, some leaning back in their chairs, others clapping their hands in derision. The sound was deafening, a mixture of derision and disbelief. For them, it was ridiculous to imagine that a 14-year-old boy, with simple clothes and still childish hands, could solve a problem that specialized engineers could not. Some took photos, others recorded videos, certain that they would have a comical souvenir of that night. Victor took advantage of the moment, convinced that the boy would soon be exposed to ridicule. His smile was wide, but his mind was still burning with panic over the unfolding disaster. The laughter was a curtain to hide his own insecurity, and Lucas, standing before the crowd, faced everything steadfastly. Margaret Carter, nearby, felt every laugh like a stab. He wanted to protect his son. He wanted to scream for him to get back in his seat, but his feet were glued to the floor. Lucas's gaze held her still. There was a silent confidence there, greater than any fear. She saw not just the boy she had raised with so much sacrifice, but someone who carried something extraordinary. Even amidst the mockery, he did not waver. With each laugh that echoed, it seemed stronger, as if it turned the mockery into fuel. And when his eyes returned to the blank screens, there was only concentration. The mocking voices no longer reached him. It was as if he were alone in front of a riddle that he knew how to solve. And that changed everything. Silence began to creep in between the laughter. One by one, the laughter died down, replaced by curious looks. Those who paid close attention noticed that Lucas wasn't shaking, wasn't smiling nervously, wasn't showing any signs of giving up. He just watched the cables, screens and panels with the calm of someone who saw an invisible path. Even some engineers, in disbelief, stopped fiddling with their computers to look at the boy. Victor, noticing the subtle change in the atmosphere, frowned. What was supposed to be a joke seemed to be getting out of hand. And for the first time that night, he felt like he might miss more than just the performance. The laughter had dissipated, giving way to a curious silence. The guests looked at each other, some frowning, others leaning in to get a better look at the boy who remained standing. Lucas Carter, 14, didn't back down. His simple posture contrasted with the grandeur of the auditorium, but his quiet confidence began to command respect. One of the engineers approached Victor Harrington and whispered something in his ear, but the millionaire just raised his hand impatiently. All eyes were now on him, awaiting his decision. If he backed down, he would show weakness. If he allowed it, he might witness an even greater failure. Caught between pride and fear, Victor took a deep breath and smiled sarcastically. "Okay, kid, let's see how bold you can get." The audience stirred, eager for the unlikely show that was about to begin. Lucas walked towards the stage with firm steps. Every meter he walked seemed to echo in the heart of his mother, Margaret, who could barely breathe. She knew the weight of that decision. Either her son would prove to be a prodigy or he would be crushed by humiliation. Still, he couldn't stop him. It was as if something greater was guiding him, as if his entire life had been preparing for that moment. Lucas walked onto the stage and approached the central console, where screens flickered in constant glitches. His hands trembled slightly, but only for an instant. Soon, his eyes narrowed, and his mind focused on the problem before him. The boy didn't see chaos. He saw a system asking to be reorganized. And when he touched it, he felt that he was finally in the right place. The engineers, in disbelief, watched from afar. One of them muttered, "This is a waste of time." Another, however, crossed his arms and remained silent, as if he sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. The previously laughing guests leaned back in their chairs, unable to take their eyes off the boy. Victor Harrington, forcing a smile, leaned against the pulpit. He believed that in seconds he would have the spectacle he so desired, Lucas's public defeat. But inside, a strange feeling gnawed at him, as if that decision could change the course of the night. The entire auditorium was waiting, and Lucas, taking a deep breath, prepared to begin. The silence in the auditorium was so heavy that you could hear the hum of equipment failing. Lucas Carter, 14, approached the main console cautiously, his fingers gliding over the buttons and cables like someone who knows every piece of a puzzle. He took a deep breath, opened his crumpled notebook, and scanned the small handwritten notes. While everyone else saw confusion, he saw logic, invisible lines connecting cause and effect. The engineers, surprised, watched the boy navigate the system naturally. Margaret, standing in the corner, clutched her apron in her hands, torn between pride and fear. Victor Harrington, for his part, maintained a forced smile, trying to hide his anxiety. Every second seemed to stretch into eternity. It was as if time had stopped to witness what the boy would do. Lucas typed quickly on an auxiliary keyboard, identifying the failure in one of the main modules. To the technicians, it seemed impossible without privileged access, but somehow the boy managed to see beyond the barriers. He connected cables, reset commands, and adjusted parameters as if he had done it hundreds of times. In the audience, whispers began. Some jeered in low voices, others watched with increasing attention. "He seems to know what he's doing," one of the foreign investors muttered, frowning. Victor pretended to laugh, but his gaze already betrayed his doubt. It wasn't a random guess. The boy worked with confidence, as if he had been born for that moment. Each keystroke sounded like a challenge to the laughter that had echoed minutes before, and what was seen as a joke began to take on the appearance of a revelation. The panel blinked slightly, displaying a progress sign. A collective gasp ran through the auditorium. For a few seconds, the guests held their breath, and even the engineers stopped moving, watching in silence. Victor leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the console, feeling the tension build in his chest. If Lucas could bring the system back, the entire narrative he had controlled until then would crumble before the elite. The millionaire didn't want to believe it, but he could no longer ignore the obvious. The boy was advancing, and each advance brought the audience closer to the truth that no one expected. Something extraordinary was about to happen. The giant screens, which had been blank for minutes, suddenly flickered, displaying rapidly executing lines of code. A murmur of astonishment ran through the auditorium. The engineers, who had previously been sneering in silence, now leaned forward, trying to follow what Lucas Carter was doing. The boy typed with impressive speed, his hands steady, his eyes fixed as if each command were engraved in his memory. The audience, made up of international investors, watched in astonishment. The skinny boy, who minutes before had been the butt of laughter, now seemed to be in control of the entire room. Margaret, with tears in her eyes, felt her heart race. His son wasn't just tinkering with machines, he was rewriting the narrative in front of everyone. It was as if the impossible had begun to unravel before the eyes of the elite, and each new sign on the screens increased the anticipation. The heavy silence turned into pure tension. Victor Harrington, leaning against the pulpit, watched with his jaw set. Sweat was running down his forehead, but he didn't dare wipe it away. He tried to maintain a posture of superiority, but his eyes betrayed his growing fear. He couldn't accept that the fate of his performance, carefully planned for months, now depended on a 14-year-old boy. His mind screamed to stop everything, but his vanity prevented him. Stopping would mean admitting defeat, and the further the codes advanced, the more the audience forgot about his proud figure to focus on that of the boy. It was a direct blow to his pride. Victor felt as if every keystroke was a crack in his power armor. And that sound, once irrelevant, now echoed like hammer blows to his reputation. Suddenly, one of the main screens came to life, projecting the Harrington Global logo in vibrant colors. The audience reacted with spontaneous applause and exclamations of surprise. The engineers looked at each other, unable to understand how the boy had done that in such a short time. Some investors were already taking photos, recording what they considered a historic scene. Margaret put her hand to her mouth, trying to contain a sob of emotion. Lucas, however, remained focused, as if he knew there was still more to be done. He wasn't looking for applause, he was looking for a solution. And as his fingers returned to the keyboard, everyone in the auditorium realized that the boy hadn't just gotten lucky. He dominated the system in a way that no one there would have dared to imagine. Lines of code raced across the screen like a symphony of light, each command executed with surgical precision. Lucas Carter, 14, worked in absolute silence, as if the chaos around him didn't exist. His fingers moved with the dexterity of a seasoned professional, and each keystroke brought the system back to life. One by one, the giant screens began to come back on, displaying colorful graphs, financial reports, and futuristic projections that had been interrupted. The auditorium erupted in gasps of surprise. It was like watching a technological miracle. Investors, previously anxious and impatient, now rose to their feet in spontaneous applause. Some even recorded videos to prove they were there at that moment. Margaret, with tears streaming down her face, could hardly believe her eyes. The son he had raised in silence was now the hero of the night. Victor Harrington, on the other hand, seemed to be falling apart. The color of his face fluctuated between red and pale, and his breathing became heavier. He tried to smile, but the gesture was mechanical, empty. Every applause for the boy was a direct blow to his vanity. He, the arrogant millionaire, was being eclipsed by the cleaning lady's son in front of investors from all over the world. Inside, his mind screamed in despair. This couldn't be happening. But there was no denying it. The night that was supposed to cement his image as a business genius was now being rewritten by the hands of a teenager who had been invisible until minutes ago. And ironically, his reputation only survived thanks to the boy he had tried to humiliate. With one last command, Lucas completed the fix, and the system was back up and running at full capacity. The screens perfectly displayed the graphics Victor had promised, accompanied by fluid animations that further impressed the guests. The auditorium erupted in deafening applause, this time not for the millionaire, but for the boy who had saved the night. Some investors approached the stage, waving respectfully, muttering words like prodigy and genius. Margaret broke down in silent tears, hugging her apron to her chest, unable to contain her pride. Lucas took a deep breath, calmly removing his hands from the keyboard. He didn't smile, he didn't celebrate, he just looked up, aware that he had done the impossible. And at that moment, everyone present understood that they were not facing a coincidence, but a rare talent, impossible to ignore. At the back of the auditorium, Margaret Carter could no longer hold back her tears. Her heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo in her ears, and her hands were shaking as she covered her mouth to stifle her sobs. For years, she had watched her son dismantle old appliances, study alone in the dim kitchen light, and fill pages and pages of notes in a battered notebook. He had always believed in Lucas's talent, but he also knew that the world rarely made room for someone like him. Now, in front of an audience made up of the international elite, everyone looked at the boy with respect. The son who carried the label of cleaner's son had just achieved something that no one could erase. It was more than pride. It was validation of every sacrifice, every night of work, every hidden tear. Margaret was crying, but on her face there was also a smile illuminated by the certainty that she had raised an extraordinary young man. Lucas remained standing on the stage, surrounded by admiring gazes. Some investors approached to shake his hand, others took pictures, and even the Harrington Global engineers, previously incredulous, now regarded him with genuine respect. The boy wasn't looking for glory, just the quiet satisfaction of having done what needed to be done. He glanced discreetly at his mother, and in that instant their eyes met. Margaret raised her trembling hand, as if applauding just for him, and Lucas responded with a slight nod. It was a silent but powerful exchange. Mother and son understood that this victory was theirs. No fortune, no title, and no future humiliation could erase that moment. That connection of pride and love would become an eternal memory, kept in both of their hearts. As the applause echoed, Lucas remained serene, but within him a flame had been lit, and this flame would push him towards horizons that even he could not yet imagine. Victor Harrington, for his part, was motionless. He tried to keep a controlled expression, but his eyes betrayed anger and shame. He knew he couldn't publicly admit that he was depending on a boy to save his night, but everyone present had already understood. Every glance at Lucas was a painful reminder that his power was not absolute. And in that moment, the arrogant millionaire felt smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. It wasn't his words, nor his fortune, that dominated the room. It was the genius of a teenager invisible until just minutes before, and this truth crushed him more than any defeat in business. The auditorium was still roaring with applause when Victor Harrington rose from the pulpit, trying to regain his composure. His forced smile contrasted with his eyes filled with anger. He raised his voice, trying to sound confident. "Look, ladies and gentlemen, everything is under control, just as I promised." But the words fell flat, ignored by the audience who continued to applaud Lucas Carter. Investors murmured among themselves, commenting more on the boy's talent than on the $1 million presentation. Some even approached Margaret, shaking her hand in respect, as if recognizing not only their son, but also the mother who had supported him thus far. Victor felt the humiliation burning like fire. He, who always believed he controlled everything, now realized that his image of invincibility had been saved by the last person he expected help from. And that was unbearable. While Victor tried to compose himself, Lucas calmly stepped off the stage and ran into his mother's arms. Margaret hugged him tightly, tears streaming shamelessly. She saw not only the son she had raised with effort and love, but a young man who had proven his worth to the world. The entire auditorium was watching them, and at that moment there was no social barrier, no difference in status. A mother's pride and a son's courage overshadowed all the surrounding luxury. Investors stood up in respect, some recording the embrace on their cell phones, aware that they were witnessing a scene that would mark the night forever. Lucas, still panting, looked at his mother and whispered, "I did it, Mom," and she replied with a choked voice, "You always managed. It was just missing for the world to see it." That moment wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Outside, the lights of New York shone brightly, reflecting in Lucas's eyes like promises of an open future. He held the old notebook to his chest, while Margaret walked beside him with firm steps, now lighter than ever. The noise of traffic, the honking, and the city life seemed small compared to what had just happened. For mother and son, the night hadn't been about technology or money. It had been about dignity, courage, and the revelation that true talent cannot be hidden forever. In that silent embrace, they understood that, no matter how difficult the path was, they were ready to face it together. And the night that began with mocking laughter ended with one certainty: nothing would be the same again. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any inspiring videos, and, of course, leave a like, because it really helps the channel continue to bring you moving stories like this. Thank you so much for your support.